We don't know where all of our wallets are. Passwords were sometimes kept in just plain text format. So this company was sort of uniquely positioned to fail.
That was FTX CEO John Ray responding to Representative Jim Hines' question yesterday at the congressional hearing on the collapse of FTX. John Ray detailing the lack of record keeping and internal control at the company. Let's bring in Representative Hines now to discuss. Representative, thanks for taking the time after a big hearing yesterday that I imagine much of the American public was paying attention to and probably would have loved to heard from SBF as well. We know that there's something else going on with jailing and detaining going there in the Bahamas, but from what you heard from the current FTX CEO, what were your biggest takeaways and what the American public should know about the situation right now, too?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think if Sam Bankman-Fried hadn't been otherwise occupied yesterday morning, we would have had a much more interesting set of hearings. You know, Mr. Ray, if you watch the hearing, he basically delivered one message. He answered the question for us of what happens when you take a bunch of 20-somethings who've never run a business before and you give them many billions of dollars, right? It was just remarkable to hear him talk about stuff that doesn't really have to do with all of the novelty of cryptocurrency and crypto assets. He was talking about the fact that they didn't even really have an accounting department. You know, they didn't have any internal controls. It sort of feels like money went into their condo in the Bahamas, got parceled out to buy stadiums or to buy whatever else they wanted to buy, without anybody doing any oversight whatsoever around the way the business operated. And I know that's not sexy cryptocurrency stuff, but boy, is there a lesson there, particularly for the customers who have now lost a lot of money. And remarkably, I tried to make this point yesterday, the supposedly super smart money that invested in this operation, the Sequoias, the Lightspeeds, apparently never saw audited financial statements because there were no audited financial statements.
And Congressman, all of this was interesting to say the least, but what role does Congress have to play in all of this? Because it seems like it was sort of a garden variety fraud, right? At least allegedly, right? A pretty big one, but still, for all this talk of regulation, it just seems like it was against existing law, right?
Yeah, that's right. And of course, it's complicated by the fact that FTX.com was a Bahamas-based entity which supposedly forbade U.S. investors from operating on their platform. That creates some jurisdictional issues. But the overall answer to your question is really clear, which is that it is now time, in fact, it's way past time, for all of these entities, whether they're based in New York or Los Angeles or the Bahamas or the Netherlands Antilles, it is time for all of these elements of the plumbing of the cryptocurrency world to be under somebody's regulatory jurisdiction. And, the SEC has been pretty clear. Gary Gensler has been pretty clear that he believes he has authority. I understand that the industry feels like there's a little ambiguity there, but one way or another, it's time to solve that question of who has regulatory oversight and make sure that these entities are operating with some semblance of oversight.
Congressman, a new Market Watch analysis out this morning noted that during this past election cycle, SBF gave almost $40 million to Democratic politicians or groups and just over $200,000 to Republicans. We'd love to get your thoughts on that and how do we prevent that from happening in the future?
Well, sadly, the answer to that question is we probably don't, right? We have a political system, partly thanks to the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United, to equate the giving of money to people like me with First Amendment protected political speech. When the Supreme Court does that, they basically make it very hard to stop that activity. That's a whole other conversation. What I will tell you is this, we won't ever know, but I got asked the question yesterday, well, because Sam Bankman-Fried gave a lot of money to members of Congress, would you guys have been gentle on him? No, I promise you, had Sam Bankman-Fried showed up yesterday, it would have been pretty ugly, regardless of who he did or did not give money to. Congressman,
did you take money from SBF and would you, or do you think some of your colleagues should give the money back?
So I did not personally get money from Sam Bankman-Fried. Many of my colleagues did. He was a regular presence on the on Capitol Hill. It's interesting. We saw another indictment yesterday suggesting that a lot of the money he gave to members of Congress came out of the corporation itself, not out of his personal funds, which is a violation of the law. So again, I'm fortunately not in the position of having to make the decision, but given all that's occurred, I would certainly, had I been a recipient of his direct giving, would be finding a way to give it back.
You mentioned that he was a frequent presence on Capitol Hill, and that is noteworthy because of how he was also trying to framework some of the future of crypto legislation. And within that, do you believe that there are components of that because of his involvement that should be thrown out or that should be held on to, as there still needs to clearly be more regulation around crypto?
Well, look, whatever you think of Sam Bankman-Fried, and there will be lots of opinions out there, very, very bright guy. And he did play a role. I know this is not the moment to be complimenting the guy, but he did play a role in taking a Congress which 4 years ago knew absolutely nothing about crypto assets and cryptocurrency, and helping in the process of educating the Congress. Now, we're not done there yet, but you know, and it wasn't just Sam Bankman-Fried. There was many others who sort of came to Congress to try to educate a bunch of lay people, that's me, on a very technical and kind of esoteric thing. You know, so now it's time for us to actually put that knowledge to work and make sure that, again, this industry can be brought into the regulatory framework that will give investors and customers some confidence that they want to play in that realm.
And Congressman, I do want to switch gears finally and just ask you about another piece of legislation that's been introduced in Congress that has to do with TikTok and potentially banning TikTok in the United States. I know that you are on the Intelligence Committee, so I'm just curious what you think of TikTok and whether you think that is a step that the U.S. should be taking.
Yeah, look, I think the first thing, I don't have a personal TikTok, right? I sit on the Intelligence Committee. I am presumably a target of interest to the Chinese state. And people need to remember that in this country, we have a bright line between government and the private sector. There's no such bright line in China, right? Basically, any company operating in China or with significant Chinese ownership or Chinese ties can get a call from the Chinese Communist Party to say, guess what? You're in the service of the government right now. So I think the first step is for anybody who's in a sensitive position to acknowledge that and maybe to think twice about you know, doing business or being involved with TikTok. You know, it's a pretty severe thing for the let's say the Treasury to say that you can't do business with this company. I think you'd want to let the due process run out before you put a blanket prohibition on that. Remember, I mean, I've got two daughters, both of whom seem to spend an inordinate amount of time on TikTok. So I'm not saying yes or no to that. I'm just saying, that's the kind of thing you really undertake a lot of due process to make sure you're getting it right.
All right, we'll leave it there. Representative Jim Himes, good to see you. We'll talk to you soon.